Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. Karan Singh, the former Prince Regent of the former royal household of Jammu and Kashmir, whose father Hari Singh refused to sign the instrument of accession for a full 2 months after India became independent in August 1947. He finally signed it on the 26th of October 1947. But today I'm here with Dr. Karan Singh because we're celebrating his 90th birthday. So congratulations, sir, and a very happy birthday from all of us at the Print.
Thank you.
Now, my first question to you is about your life, the transition from would-be king to commoner. It's been a fascinating story.
Yes.
90 years old, and perhaps I don't know of anybody else who's been an as intimate witness to history, you know, from the time when your father signed the instrument of accession, then you became Sadr-e-Riyasat, then you were cabinet minister much later in Indira Gandhi's government. But your first thoughts on Jammu and Kashmir today and what it was when you were in 1947?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that I have indeed been through many, many transitions. The transition, first of all, from feudalism to democracy.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I can claim that I spearheaded the transition from feudalism to democracy, because I was the first person really from the so-called princely family to enter political life directly and became a cabinet minister.
And you never hesitated to give up your palaces and
No.
your...
Well, yes, you know, I was faced with some very excruciating choices, but my mentor was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and he was the great leader, charismatic leader of India at that time. It's difficult for people like you who were not there to realize the sort of charisma that Jawaharlal ji had. And he was my mentor, and therefore politically I followed him. And he was the one who urged me to accept these offices, first of all, the Sadr-e-Riyasat and the governor.
Right.
And then to come, when he passed away, then I came here in 1967. I became cabinet minister.
But these difficult choices that you're talking about, give me one example.
Well, you know, when the Sadr-e-Riyasat problem came, my father was not very happy. Because after all, you know, Sheikh Abdullah had gone out of his way to attack the dynasty and to abolish the monarchy, as it were, and made a big song and dance about it. And thereafter, for me to accept a post which he has created
Right.
by an assembly where he has the majority was not really very pleasant for
him.
Bapuji also. You know, but you know, I took the decision to come into public life, and that was my opening into public life.
So was there discomfort between you and your father?
Well, not really discomfort, but you know, we belonged to different generations. He belonged to the feudal generation, which had a lot of positive points also, not only negativities. And I was a young man, young idealistic man, who wanted to be part of the new India, wanted to take part in what Jawaharlal Nehru called the adventure of building a new India. So I wanted to go there. I didn't want to sit in my palace only.
And yet Jawaharlal Nehru was very close to Sheikh Abdullah. So how did you reconcile that?
This was a very interesting thing. See, my correspondence with Panditji is a whole volume of my correspondence with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And he always called me my dear Tiger. Tiger was my pet name, by the way. So every letter of his is my dear Tiger, never any other thing. And he was fond of Sheikh Abdullah too, no doubt about it. Some people say overly fond and overly soft on him.
Would you say that?
Well, in a way, yes, perhaps he did allow Sheikh Abdullah to call the shots. You see, I don't want to go into the whole details of the background, but the thing is that at that time, the whole question of plebiscite was in the air.
Right.
See, now it's something done with, nobody bothers about it. But at that time it was in the air. In fact, a plebiscite administrator had been appointed by the United Nations.
But it was Jawaharlal Nehru who took the issue to the United Nations.
United Nations, which he need not have done. He did it in good faith, and I think urged by Lord Mountbatten, who said, no, you're the leader of the new post colonial legacy, and that it'll be a very big thing. And we thought it was an open and shut case. They've invaded us. And we've gone there and said that they invaded. Not realizing that once you go into UN, one gets bogged down. Because every country was playing their own game, particularly the British. And so we got stuck there.
But you realized it even at the time that the British were playing their own.
They were playing their own, no doubt about it.
But Nehru didn't realize that.
Nehru may have realized it later. He must have realized it later.
Yeah.
But not at the time when he was going to the United Nations. And so to come back to the point, the plebiscite, who was going to win the plebiscite for India? Sheikh Abdullah. So that is why Sheikh Abdullah was able to call the shots. In fact, the fact that my father was exiled and my mother was as a result of Sheikh Abdullah's insistence. He said, I cannot win the plebiscite as long as Maharaja Hari Singh and Maharani Tara Devi are, because Mahaji was much more gregarious. She used to go to the refugee camp. She was from a village girl, and she was not a princess originally. So she had a common touch. She used to go to refugees and banto kapde and anaj and ye and wo. So she was very popular. So Sheikh Abdullah was very worried about both of them. And ultimately, the government of India had to bow to their.
But were you bitter about that with Nehru?
No, I wasn't bitter with Nehru at all. Bapuji was bitter. My father was bitter. Rightly so. Nizam of Hyderabad, who fought against India, was made Raj Pramukh. And Maharaja Hari Singh, who acceded to India, was exiled.
But he took 2 months to accede to India. Why did he hesitate for so long?
Jyoti, if you want to get into that, it's a very long story. The whole interview will go into J&K.
Tell us a little bit.
You won't know anything about me.
No, I will know about you, but I really want to know. I mean, you know.
You see, it wasn't so easy. If you see my book, my autobiography, you will see the letter that my father wrote to Lord Mountbatten along with the instrument of accession, the covering letter.
Yes.
In which he says very clearly, I was considering which of the two dominions to join, or whether it would be better for my state to stand independent, of course with good relations with both.
Right.
That was what he was really wanting.
So he was considering independence?
He was considering independence. It's not such a great path as you now mention, independence. At that time, the princes, they were all quite capable of wanting to become independent, although it is unrealistic. But everybody, Travancore wanted to become that, came to grief. Hyderabad wanted to be independent, they came to grief. So that was the situation. He didn't perhaps realize the complexity. And then his hand was forced by the tribal invasion.
Yeah. And that's what happened.
And when the tribal invasion came, he needed help. He came to India and said, we can't help you unless you're part of India.
So do you remember those days at all?
I was in a plaster palace. I was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But I remember, of course, I was 16 when this happened. I was in the same building when Bapuji signed the instrument of accession. Not the same room, but the same building. And I do remember the days, and I do remember how after that he signed in October 26th, and by April next year we were all summoned to Delhi, and Sardar Patel broke the news to him that he stay out for 6 months, they said. He never returned, only his ashes returned. I brought the ashes back.
Yeah.
C'est la vie.
But tell me, today when, after 70 years, more than 70 years, Kashmir has finally been integrated into the Indian Union in 2019, on the 5th of August.
Jyoti,
how do you see that?
No, I challenge that. The instrument of accession, yes, you're right. And the instrument of accession made Jammu and Kashmir a permanent part of India. The word you are now using is integration.
Right.
You see, other states signed the same instrument of accession as my father did, later signed integration agreements.
Yeah.
Please remember that.
Yes.
What Sardar Patel did was not so much get the instruments, but get those agreements about the integration, the personal property and so on.
Yeah.
In this case, we didn't integrate on our own, we were integrated by the parliament.
I know, but the Constituent Assembly gave way to. But the Kashmir always had a special status.
Yes, it always felt that it was special. It was always.
And that's what Article 370 was about.
That was all about. The mukut hai, Bharatvarsh ka mukut hai, special. Mukut hote. Ab to state में नहीं रहे, we have been demoted to union territory.
But then
It was a
isn't
shock to the Kashmiris, particularly to the ethnic Kashmiris.
both Kashmiri Pandits, Dogras
Kashmiri
as well
Pandits, no, Dogras are different. You see, Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims are Kashmiris. The Kashmiri Pandits were forced out. That was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Which, it was, 3-4 lakhs of people, बच्चे, बूढ़ियाँ, सब चले आए, and they forced out of their homeland. And they've been out for what? They were forced out in 89.
Yeah.
कितने साल हो गए? 40 साल हो गए.
30 साल हो गए.
और the Dogras are a different community. Dogras
Yes.
we are Dogras from
That's
India.
right.
The Dogras, in fact, welcomed the integration to begin with. Now they're getting a little worried about jobs and things and all. But it's the Kashmiris certainly felt gravely shattered.
How did you look at it?
At this recent thing.
Yes.
You see, I have
What Prime Minister Modi did.
by now I have transcended the local ethnicities. I look upon myself as an Indian now. I'm a Dogra. I'm proud to be a Dogra. The Dogri language, we got it in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. And I've been fighting for the Jammu people and for those for a long time. But well, it was, what shall I say? It was very drastic and done in a very I don't want to use the word cruel, but yes, because you shut everybody down totally, total lockdown, and then crack, suddenly you do that. So it wasn't as if it was done after a process of consultation or as a result of a consensus. It was done.
But perhaps that was the only way to do it, because the Kashmiris would have never come to terms with it otherwise.
Perhaps that may be the case. आसानी से मानना नहीं था उन्होंने. You're right.
But the fact that, Farooq Abdullah and people across the political spectrum, Saifuddin Soz, Farooq Abdullah, Yusuf Tariqani, they were all shut up under house arrest.
For over a year. Mehbooba shut up for over a year.
Mehbooba Mufti.
Mirwais Farooq, I mean, all the leaders of Kashmir, Kashmiri Muslim leaders were shut up. So, that speaks for itself, Jyoti.
Did you reach out to them? But have you?
No, I didn't get involved after this. Once this happened, I withdrew really, because it's a very sensitive thing and whatever I may say or do could make a big impact. So I didn't want to embarrass the government of India.
But you have said earlier that, when you then transitioned from the state and then you came to the center and you began playing a political role, a national role, shall we say. And you have said somewhere that you integrated yourself into the national consensus.
Yes. That's what I meant. I meant when I came here, became part of the Indian national political process. I got myself out of the J&K.
But you feel you're Kashmiri, aren't you?
I'm not a Kashmiri. Never say that. I'm a Dogra. Jyoti. Please be very clear. For example, if you tell an Irishman that you're English, they'll say, I'm not English, I'm Irish. So please do not call me a Kashmiri. I have great regard for the Kashmiris. We've ruled them for 100 years. We have good relations now. I have a great deal of goodwill in Kashmir. But I am not a Kashmiri. I am a Dogra, ethnic Dogra.
But the state is Jammu and Kashmir.
Jammu and Kashmir, not Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir. That's another mistake. A lot of people talk about Kashmir. There's no such state.
But it is Jammu and Kashmir. You're part of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Kashmir, yes. So what? Everybody is part of something.
But this national consensus that you talk about, do you feel that the former state of Jammu and Kashmir was never really comfortable with the national consensus? That the integration, despite the fact that Sheikh Abdullah ruled it for so long, then after that Farooq Abdullah, there was politics, democratic politics in the state for decades.
They put it this way, the Kashmiri leadership always wanted a special position for Kashmiris. That says it all. Whether it's Farooq Abdullah, whether it's Umar Abdullah, whether it's Mehbooba Mufti, whoever, they always wanted a special position for the Kashmir. And that special position, which was guaranteed to them by under Article 370, they wanted that to be maintained. So you can't blame, they were not asking for something they just wanted the article in the Indian Constitution to be maintained. 70 saal to raha. The skies didn't fall. The much maligned Article 370 was there for 70 years as part of the constitution.
So then,
So why are you don't sort of get unduly concerned about? But the special position is the key. The special position that was promised to Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, which meant the Kashmiris, because they were dominating, that special position they wanted to retain it. In fact, they wanted, if anything, to strengthen it further, get more autonomy.
so how do you look at the fact that Prime Minister Modi said enough is enough? Kashmir is one state in the Indian Union. It doesn't need to have any more special
But
position.
he said that. His word is law. And Parliament has passed it now.
And you would agree with that?
Well, there's no option.
So Kashmir has to come, or Jammu and Kashmir has to come to terms with it.
More or less.
You think this will be beneficial in the long run?
It remains to be seen.
Remains to be seen.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely remains to be seen. Because we do not know, as a result of all of this, tourism remains shattered. For a whole year, year and a half, tourism, which is the mainstay for Kashmir, was shattered. The handicrafts were shattered, the fruit exports were shattered. So we suffered heavy losses. So the first thing the centre has to do is to fulfill those losses, make good those losses. Then we'll see. They said that badi tarakki ho gayi hai, bahut badhapa hoga. Let's see. We can't tell. It's only a year.
Do you think that the assembly should be restored, that politics should come back to being business as usual?
Of course, I think we should have you see, for one thing, we should at least be a state. We shouldn't remain a union territory, because union territory is sort of even below a state.
Right.
So we, from a special positions, come down to below a state. So what I would like to see, as I've said constantly, we must have, the political process must begin. It has begun to some extent with those village elections that took place.
Right.
Now we need a delimitation. We need a proper assembly in Jammu and Kashmir. And along with that, we need to be restored to a full status of a state.
So you trust Prime Minister Modi and the BJP to do the right thing?
I hope so, yes. Now I hope so.
You're not going to be very popular in your former Congress party.
Well,
say
that's
this.
neither here nor there. The question is, I'm an independent thinker. I have my own views on all these matters.
So let's talk a little bit about yourself and when you move from Jammu and Kashmir to the centre, as it were. That transition, tell me about that. How did that?
You see, what happened was I had been 18 years head of the state. First of all, regent, appointed by my father.
So what do you do as regent?
Nothing, you're head of state. I'm head of
It's
state.
a ceremonial.
To preside over convocations and do opening ceremonies and so on. So, like governors,
Right.
more or less. So for 3 years, from 1949, when Bapuji went out, to 1952, I was regent. My power, authority derived from. In 52, they abolished the monarchy,
Yes.
which was, monarchies everywhere were finishing in any case. But Sheikh Abdullah had such a strong anti-Dogra venom. All his life he had fought against the Dogras. So he had to rub it in. He had to have a big celebration. We've got rid of Dogra rule, we've done this, that. That was in 52. When at the same time the post of Sadr Riyasat was created,
Right.
which was offered to me. So then that post I accepted. I was elected 3 times Sadr Riyasat, in 52, in 57 and in 62. In 64, there was a presidential order which changed the Prime Minister of J&K to Chief Minister and changed the Sadr Riyasat to Governor.
Right.
So I became a governor.
Sure.
So 18 years regent, Sadr Riyasat, governor. Then in 1967, I wrote to Indiraji. I said, look, I've been here for 18 years. I don't want to spend the rest of my life here. I want to get into national politics. And by the way, by then I'd known her quite well, because Panditji was very kind. He used to always call me over to meals. Asha and me, we used to go. And so once I remember they were having a dinner for Jacqueline Kennedy, and in the rang, can you and Asha come over for dinner? So we used to fly in. So we had a very good relationship. So I wrote to her first, and she said, let the first election be over. 76 election. Then when the election came, then I said, look, I'm now quitting, I've got to come. So then I came here,
67.
67. 15th of March 67, from this house, I got a call. Prime Minister wants you to join the government as Minister for Tourism and Civil Aviation. So that was a 10-year with her. Extraordinary. I saw her high point in Bangladesh, tremendous victory, unprecedented, and I saw the low point in the emergency. I lived through all of that.
And during the emergency?
Very difficult time. But not for me. It was interesting, you know. The main problem in emergency was the sterilization. I was Minister for Health.
That's my
I
question.
was all the time, my letters are on, when the Shah Commission looked into it, all my letters are on record, writing to Chief Minister to say, I'm getting reports that force is being used, please do not do it, please do not do it. I kept saying, I never raised my targets. You know, we had sterilization targets at that time. I had got a very reasonable set of targets.
So you went against Sanjay Gandhi?
No, he did. He went. I'll tell you what again. He unilaterally raised the targets, and the North Indian chief ministers, wanting to please him, thought the way to please him is to fulfill those new targets. That was the result. That resulted in this disaster of the forced sterilizations, which was then paid up obviously by the.
But you had your own targets in the beginning.
His targets were there. That was open. It was, national population policy was before the parliament.
But you continued to. So that's my question: is that why did you continue to remain in Indira's cabinet during the emergency?
Well, I was taking part in cabinet meetings, and I was doing all the hospitals and doing the BCGs and the smallpox eradication we did at that time. I invited Mala here. We had a big festival, a ceremony to celebrate this eradication of smallpox. So I continued with my health. Family planning was not the only thing. As health minister, I was doing a lot of other things.
But were you disturbed by the fact that Indira Gandhi had to impose an emergency upon her own people?
Yes, I was. In fact, I had written a letter to her, which is in my I don't think it's in my autobiography. It's one of my later books, where when the Allahabad judgment had come, now you know sequence of events.
Absolutely.
Allahabad judgment, unseating her. At that time, मैंने लिखी थी चिट्ठी उनको. I said, I'm writing to you not as a cabinet colleague, but as an elder sister. I suggest that you send in your resignation to Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad. Let him say to you, I don't accept this until the Supreme Court verdict comes. But at least you would have made the gesture.
That's right.
I was doing, no, he never answered that. I don't know if he liked it or not. But luckily I kept a copy of the letter so people can't say I made it up afterwards.
So
that was before. That was before. But naturally it was a very curious time. You know, we were living in a bubble. We were being told different things in the cabinet, you know, and the government. और ज़मीनें की बातें और हो रही थी. That is why we got thrown out. And interestingly, Jyoti, remember, Indira Gandhi lost, Sanjay, everybody was wiped out. Health Minister, I won my election, even in 1977.
From Udhampur.
From Udhampur.
So you feel vindicated by the fact that, despite the fact that you were Minister for Health and
Health,
Family
I think people realized where the trouble was. But they knew that I wasn't responsible for it. They knew who was responsible, and they wiped them out.
So let's talk a little bit about the Indira Sheikh Abdullah Accord.
Yes. You see, after remaining in detention or whatever you may call it, exile if you like, for I don't know how many years, he was exiled in 53 and the accord came about in
75.
23 साल हो गए. So 23 साल से he was once or twice released in between, then put up. So after that, after the Bangladesh war particularly, I think he also realized that he has to come to some kind of terms with India. All that they were hoping they were going to get some aid from anybody, were not going to get anybody. So then the interlocutor was G. Parthasarathi, and they finally came to this accord, where again, if you read the accord, the special position is maintained, but various other matters are taken. That was in 1975. But then after that, he passed away in.
Are you bitter about the fact
that... No, I'm not bitter. I've never been bitter about anything. I'm the most non-bitter person you can meet. You see, bitterness eats into your heart. Never be bitter. You shouldn't be bitter also. You sound as if you're bitter about something. You shouldn't be. Because you brought up this word very often. I'm never bitter. हालात होते हैं, बदलते रहते हैं. You've got to come to terms with them. Where is the question of
because
bitterness?
you said that Sheikh Abdullah was very anti-Dogra.
Of course, viciously, vitriolically anti-Dogra. His whole life was anti. He started in 1931, the year I was born.
That's right.
So his whole politics was. He was a great leader, mind you, of the Kashmiris, no doubt. Remarkable orator, outstanding leader of the Kashmiris, not of the Dogras, not of the Ladakhis.
What was your relationship like with him?
Okay, I mean, he's all right. We were never rude to each other. Except I arrested him towards the end. Had to sign his papers for arrest.
But Ms. Indira Gandhi, she was interesting, wasn't she? She was surrounded by Kashmiri Pandits.
Entirely surrounded by Kashmir. In fact, the Shimla Accord, 5 Kashmiri Pandits, P.N. Haksar, D.P. Dhar, T.N. Kaul, his private secretary,
P.N.
Dhar, R.N. Kaul.
That's
5 Kashmiri Pandits. And I'm sorry to say, we lost at the table what we won in the war. I was not at all happy about that Shimla agreement. She should have struck a much harder bargain with Bhutto. I don't know why she was.
What do you think happened?
I don't know. The Kashmiri Pandits must have advised her. But she didn't take me there. I was also a cabinet minister. She took D.P. Dhar. She was more comfortable with him.
So again, the question: were you upset about that?
Well, yes. As an Indian national, I felt that having won that magnificent victory, where we defeated them completely and had territory and thousands of people, we should have got more.
So the Kashmiri Pandits let India down.
Well, it's difficult. They're a brilliant community, mind you. The Kashmiri Pandits, a highly educated community, a brilliant community. But this particular batch of Kashmiri Pandits who were around Indira Gandhi at that time advised her. I wouldn't say let India. I mean, they were very patriotic people. I wouldn't give them say anything about the letting India. But yes, it was a bit of a come down, I thought.
But she let it happen. Why do you think she let Zulfikar Ali Bhutto
off the hook?
Yes, off the hook.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Of course you know.
No, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. She's a tough lady and she wouldn't normally do that. Kissinger, by the way, when I was ambassador to Washington, Kissinger came over one day. And I asked him, I said, Henry, why are you what did you send the boats? He said, look, ambassador, we were quite clear Indira Gandhi was a nationalist. We knew that she was going to attack Bangladesh and liberate it. Our fear was that having done that, she would turn on Pakistan. And that we couldn't allow because Pakistan had given the opening for Nixon to China.
That's right.
So it was that what we were afraid of. We were not worried about East Bengal. That's what he said to me.
Did you ask him why the Americans supported Pakistan and were anti-India at the time?
Clearly they supported Pakistan. They said because they gave us the opening to China. Which for Nixon was a big thing, mind you.
Yes.
Nixon's visit to China was a big thing.
That's right.
So he didn't appear anti-Indian, but they definitely at that time were leaning towards Pakistan.
For somebody like him, a former Jew, well, not a former Jew, for somebody like him, a Jew who escaped the Holocaust from Germany, to not understand that all these millions of refugees from Pakistan, from East Pakistan, were escaping to come into India.
Yes, well, he was Jewish. But that's okay. And again, like the Kashmiri Pandits, the Jewish are the most so brilliant. Look at the way they win Nobel Prizes all the time. Tiny community.
But the Kashmiri Pandits, you feel, whether it was D.P. Dhar, T.N. Kaul, they should have struck a better
I think
deal.
They should have. It was Indira who really had to decide. I mean, you can't blame the advisors, ultimately the main figure. But it is a curious coincidence that there were 5 Kashmiri Pandits, only 5 Kashmiri Pandits around, and now I wasn't there.
But isn't it ironical that the problem of Kashmir between India and Pakistan is dominated, at least for a large part of that time, was dominated by Kashmiri Pandits, and you know, Mrs. Gandhi herself was.
And oddly
half
enough, it's
Kashmiri.
the Kashmiri Pandits who got thrown out lock, stock and barrel years later. It's a very cruel irony. You're right.
Now, somebody like you, Dr. Karan Singh, I mean, I don't know if that many people who have met Khrushchev, a young Dalai Lama who escapes from Tibet, Jonas Salk, you talked about Henry Kissinger, you know, this wide variety of very interesting people that you met, Jacqueline Kennedy.
Yes, I have met. You see,
Was it a function of where you were? You know, you were sort of part of the former
No,
royal
it
house.
was a function, first of all, the 18 years that I was in J&K, there was a visitor's book. So everyone who came signed the book. So I had all sorts of people. I had Swami Prabhavananda, I had the man who wrote, you know, the great Joseph Campbell and authors like that. So Vidya Naipaul came out. He was living in his first wife in a small houseboat.
Yeah.
They called it. So I met a lot of very interesting people, learned a lot. I've been, all my life I wanted to learn. We also started studying. I was an undergraduate when I became regent. And Asha also, my wife was also. So both of us were studying. She studied for Hindi examination. I studied for my BA, I did my BA. Then I said, BA I did from J&K University. I said, I must move. People will say, apni university ko de rahe hain. So I came to Delhi. So I read for 2 years for the MA. Here also I have a university record in Delhi University, by the way.
Yeah, first class first.
Then I said I wasn't satisfied. I wanted to do my PhD, which I did on civil. So I've had this passion to learn all my life. That's why I've met all these interesting people. And there's a Sanskrit saying, Ahano Bhadra Ketavo Yantu Vishwata. Let noble thoughts come to us from every side. Our civilization, the Indic civilization, has always been a crossroads, open to new ideas. And I learned that from Jawaharlal Nehru also. He said, Tiger, whenever you look at a problem, look at it in its historical perspective. Don't forget the history. You know, we tend to look upon independent events without realizing that. So I learned a great deal from a variety. I've written a book, mind you, Meetings with Remarkable Women. 27 women. I'll give you, you would like a copy of that book?
Sure.
You must have a look at that. You'll find it fascinating. Because you know, you may have heard of a man called Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was this Central European thinker who had a big following, cult following. He wrote a book called Meetings with Remarkable Men. So Jyoti, my daughter, who's a PhD herself in philosophy and taught philosophy in Delhi University, she said, Bapuji, why don't you write Meetings with Remarkable Women? You've met so many women. So I said, okay. So you'll find that fascinating. I met all sorts of women, including Madame de Salzmann, who was the last disciple of Jung and the mother of Aurobindo Ashram. And
Right.
of course, I wrote about Indira Gandhi. And so the point is that I have been always learning by God's grace, and it's divine grace actually, you know, that has really kept me going, no doubt.
But sir, tell me, you talked about how the Indic civilization says, you know, open all your windows, let sort of thoughts and from all influences from all parts of the world come in. But you also started the Virat Hindu Samaj.
Yes. Now the story of the Virat Hindu Samaj is that when that village in the south, Meenakshipuram, changed their religion en masse.
Because when the conversions took place from Hindu to Islam.
And the whole thing, the whole village converted, and the name converted. No, it was, everybody was this thing. So I thought that we have to try and see how we can reintroduce the Vedantic values, which are my Hinduism is Upanishad based Hinduism, is Vedantic Hindu. It is the Upanishad, Vivekananda, Radhakrishnan parampara, as it were. So because Hinduism, of course, can be of many types. So I started it for that purpose, and we had huge rallies around the country. But I realized after a year or two that the RSS had taken it over, because I didn't have any organization. They were the ones who had helped.
So why did they do that?
Because it was a good platform, suited them perfectly.
And were you not okay with it?
No, then I gradually withdrew.
But why did it bother you that the RSS took over?
Because then that would be their particular type of ideology, not my Vedantic ideology.
But is there a difference between the RSS
Yes,
school of thought and yours?
Yes.
What's that?
There's a difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. You may have read all the books. Shashi Tharoor wrote about it. Varma has written about it.
What do you think?
I think that Hinduism should be inclusive. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrideshe tishtati. The Lord resides in the heart of all beings. So to exclude people because of their religion, I think, and there's a very famous saying in the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one. The wise call it by many names. In other words, we have accepted multiple paths to the divine. We are the only religion in the world that has accepted multiple paths to the divine. Every other religion says, no, this is the only path. You must go by this path. We say, no. Go by whatever path. You can't tie the divine down to any particular path. That openness, that is not exactly what the RSS does.
What do they do?
Well, you know about them better than I do.
No, you tell me.
So they tend to be somewhat exclusive. I mean, it's well known.
But you know,
I mean, I'm not saying they're patriotic people. They're very well organized. There's no doubt about it. Extraordinary, remarkable organization. But their philosophy is slightly exclusive.
But Mohan Bhagwat, who is the current Sarsanchalak of
he's made the right noises.
He's made the right noises.
Yes, he has. And let's hope they'll realize that ultimately Hinduism's glory is its capacity to open itself to whoever goes. In the Gita, Krishna says, whatever way people worship, I will strengthen their Shraddha.
But I think he says, what Mohan Bhagwatji says is that everybody was or is or was a
everybody
Hindu.
is a Hindu, and that's a semantic thing. Everybody is a Hindu. What does that mean? I mean, they're not practicing Hindus now. Originally, who was there, kahan se aaye, kya? That's a semantic, employ. Everybody in India is a Hindu. But they don't recommend themselves as Hindus. हम जबरदस्ती कहते तो हिंदू, वो कहते नहीं साहब हम मुसलमान हैं, हम सिख हैं, हम जैन हैं, हम बौद्ध हैं. हम कहते नहीं आप हिंदू हैं. They couldn't say it. There's nothing wrong in saying it.
But you feel that creates divisions and tensions.
It does, obviously. Doesn't it?
I think it does, but I mean, do you feel that there was no need to say this and that?
It's not what I feel. The RSS has grown over the years. It's got its own ideology.
Why do you think it has grown? I mean, India has been a majority Hindu country for centuries. After independence, we are 73 years old as independent. We still remain an 80% majority Hindu country. What is this? So what is the RSS worried about?
Well, the RSS is worried, first of all, the trauma of partition. You can't remember. Maybe your parents came from Punjab, did they?
They did.
They must have come with the shirts on their back, badi mushkil se.
That's right.
Ask that generation. You see, the trauma of partition, the fact that the Muslim majority states opted out of India, and in the process there were mass murders and killings on both sides. This has a deep scar, number one. Number two, the memory of what the Muslims did or were supposed to have done during their rules. What Aurangzeb did. Look what they do, Sikhs. ऐसे काटे या क्या करे उनको कर दिए.
You don't have that memory.
I don't have that memory.
But why not? Your father, Hari Singh, was a Hindu Maharaja who ruled over a predominantly Muslim population.
But we had got on very well for 100 years.
So that's my question to you. Why is it that you don't suffer from the trauma of...
Well, we didn't suffer from the trauma. You see, the states were comparatively insulated from the trauma to begin with. But then the whole thing seeped in and...
No, you didn't have the trauma like Punjab had.
We
but
did.
Kashmir escaped that.
No, it didn't. No.
The Kashmir escaped that because there was no partition.
It didn't escape that. There was a partition. During the war, Mirpur, Muzaffarabad,
that's right.
Those whole areas, they were also massacred. Hindus and Sikhs were massacred en masse. So there was a partition. The only thing is, this partition was de jure, that partition is de facto.
Factor.
But de facto, the state has been partitioned. In 1947, we lost 50% of the state, Gilgit-Baltistan and the Mirpur-Muzaffarabad belt. Other state to Bogi. So there were refugees pouring in from Mirpur and Muzaffarabad into Jammu, and some counter reaction.
But that trauma must have scarred your father.
Yes, it must have scarred him more than me, because I was only 16 at the time, and I wasn't really au fait with the whole situation.
But you become Sadr-e Riyasat in 1952. The trauma of that partition is everywhere to see. My question to you is, why are you not scarred? Why don't you carry that burden?
Well, maybe because I was able to detach myself from that and look to the future. You see, I've never looked back. One of the reasons why, you ask what is your secret. I've never looked back, either in anger or in sorrow. I've never looked back. I've always looked to the future. Even today at 90, I look to the future.
The RSS looks back. It looks at memories of brutality.
They bring that in, yes. They have that. One, ultimately, Jyoti, you've got to get over some things. You can't keep living in a negative mindset. I found that is what shrivels people up. That is what burns people up. Revenge, bitterness, anger, hatred. These are lethal emotion, lethal. As lethal as tuberculosis, cancer, COVID or whatever.
So have you come to terms, or did your father come to terms with the loss of half the state of Jammu and Kashmir?
He lost the whole state. He was exiled.
No, he was in exile, but when the state was partitioned, like you said, Muzaffarabad.
It was about the same time that it happened. He was very, very upset, of course.
You have come to terms with that?
I have come to terms with it. I have come to it's a reality.
Which is that part of Kashmir remains in Pakistan.
Remains in Pakistan. Theoretically, we still claim it. We can continue to do that. But in practice, I don't see a major change in the geographical, unless we get another conflict, God forbid.
So but why is it that Prime Minister after Prime Minister is unable to see that and unable to come to terms with that?
You see, because we don't want to say it, because by saying it, then we accept the fact technically and legally, and this whole thing is still technically with the United Nations, or we don't want to weaken our position. So our position of the government of India, regardless of who is there, with Jawaharlal Nehru to Narendra Modi, remains that Jammu and Kashmir for the whole state is a part of India, because Maharaja Hari Singh signed the instrument of succession when he was ruler of the whole state. Therefore, the whole state belongs to India. And Mirpur Muzaffarabad, Gilgit-Baltistan is as a result of Pakistan aggression. That is the official position.
Right.
You've got to accept that. Whether that is the actual situation on the ground has also been quite clear, equally clear.
So what should Prime Ministers do? Shouldn't you come to terms with the reality on the ground?
Well, you see, that raises, Jyoti, a broader question. What should we do with our relationship with Pakistan?
Yes.
Don't forget, this whole thing revolves not around the local people in J&K so much, it's Pakistan.
Right.
They were the ones who
aggressed
the invasion. They were the ones who are in control of these areas. So, whether we can at some point in time normalize our relations with Pakistan. When SAARC came into being, I remember I used to say that, look, France, Germany and the UK were at each other's throats for centuries. Millions of people perished in the battlefields of Europe. And yet today, look what happened. The mark has disappeared, the lira has disappeared, the franc has disappeared. You do not know in Europe which country you're in. Unfortunately, Britain has now opted out, which I think was a very, very silly thing to do. But nonetheless. So I said, okay, if at some point in time SAARC develops like that, then maybe we can get over these hitches and these age-old problems. But SARC unfortunately didn't develop like that. It still could at some point. But that's the only way it can happen. There's no other way. The only way, but there can't be any aggression now. There can't be any physical change of the LOC, I don't feel now, without a major conflict, which I think would be disastrous for both countries. So if in due course of time SARC is revived, strengthened, and gets to a point where both countries feel that they can get over their difficulties, that is the only way I see. We may not see it in our lifetimes.
You are a devout Hindu, sir. Prime Minister Modi is a devout Hindu. He is a very powerful Prime Minister.
Yes.
What would you say to him today?
About what?
About the Jammu and Kashmir question, relations with Pakistan.
Well, he's taken this drastic move in J&K. As I said, the first thing I would say to him is to please, first of all, recompense the state for the losses that it has incurred, running into many billions of rupees as a result of this whole change. Number one. Number two, please organize the elections. Let's have a elected assembly. Bring us back to the status of a full-fledged state. That's one thing I'd say to him.
And on Pakistan?
On Pakistan, he is very strong, as you know. But there's been some thaw. In fact, recently, if you see, for the first time, there's been a statement that both India and Pakistan will abide by the LOC.
Right.
So there's some thaw. You know, we must never write anything off permanently. एक ना एक दिन तो मैंने राज्यसभा में in my farewell speech, you must listen to that. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
I said I want to give you a shlok before I leave. शकीर बुदायूनी का, हर चीज़ नहीं है मरकज़ पर, एक ज़र्रा इधर एक ज़र्रा उधर, नफ़रत से ना देखो दुश्मन को, शायद वो मोहब्बत कर बैठे.
So that's your advice to Prime Minister Modi vis-a-vis Pakistan?
Yes, you never know. But we have to keep our guard up. We've suffered a lot. Look at Bombay, look at the way they attacked the Taj Mahal Hotel. I mean, they've done terrible things.
And never once even acknowledged
Never acknowledged them. And so it's not that we can sort of suddenly whitewash them. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have to see what happens. Until Pakistan itself realizes that it is not in their interest to continue to confront India. What have they gained? They've lost half their country.
That's right.
And they're hanging on to half of J&K, okay, but that's about it. What have they gained? They're virtually bankrupt, I believe. And constantly sort of, you know, so poverty, their leadership also has a difficult time. Because when Imran came in, you should remember the first speech usne ki. It's very impressive, you know, he's a cricket captain and all, and you know, we thought...
A good-looking man.
Good-looking man. At one time, Benazir and Rahul were there, both good-looking. Rajiv were there, both good-looking prime ministers. हमने कहा शायद कुछ हो जाए, नहीं बनती.
कुछ नहीं हुआ.
There's some malign destiny continues to haunt J&K. जब भी कोई बात बनने वाली होती है, Manmohan Singh was started doing something with Musharraf. उसने he went and arrested that Chief Justice. He went down. कोई ना कोई ऐसा
अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी with नवाज शरीफ
यानी बात अब बनते बनते टूट जाती है. So let's see. We've got to be patient in such matters.
So as you look back on these 90 years,
remarkable, extraordinary 90.
Quite an extraordinary life.
You see, Asha and I, you must remember my wife. We were married for 60 years, Jyoti. She passed away in the 60th year of our marriage. We travelled everywhere together. We travelled around the world, literally to the ends of the earth, to Norwegian fjords and to Bariloche in Argentina, to Machu Picchu in Peru, to Ayers Rock in Australia. कोई जगह नहीं छोड़ी हमने. We had marvelous time. We've travelled.
But you didn't let your physical...
No, despite my physical problem,
I
even started playing tennis. I even started playing tennis.
That's amazing.
And some golf. Although I have a permanently stiff hip, I have a nail this big in my hip. But I didn't let it get me down. Again, अरे देखो अब मुझे हो गया, मैं नहीं करता. Then I'd go down. You got to have a positive attitude. चलो ठीक है, if there's many people have physical handicaps, I have a physical handicap. But I have not let it handicap me. That's what I feel. I hope you find it.
Dr. Karan Singh, the fact that you can laugh and joke at age 90, it's a great lesson for all of us, a great moral for all of us. A very, very happy birthday to you again from all of us at The Print.
Thank you.
And we wish you many, many joyous years ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank Shekhar also on my behalf.
I will. Thank you so much for your time.